Hi. We made this film in the run-up to the general election in May to capture the voices of people who've dedicated their lives, and not just their working lives, to making housing associations what they are today. This is just a taste of what they've shared with us and a glimpse into the legacy developed over 40 years by that generation of leaders of housing associations.
Mary Taylor's been badgering me for ages to actually get the story of how community-based housing associations were started. And in some ways they were started in Govan. It's worth remembering that in 1970 the attitude to tenements was to knock everything down and replace them. While we were doing that experiment, other people were changing their attitude towards tenements and saying, well, these tenements are going to have to survive for a lot longer, so if we can use this model that we've developed in Govan, then can we extend it? And from there, then the next place was Rothesay, of all places, because the new councils, the director of housing for Rothesay had decided that really something needed done at Rothesay. So tenements became a driving force alongside the other driving force in 1974, which was, of course, special needs housing. So people at Hanover and Beeld and Kirkcare all arose at the same time. So we had these two strands, effectively, in housing association world in the early 1970s.
I was very fortunate at the time because I managed to get the job of leading the small team in the Housing Corporation in Scotland that was working on tenement rehabilitation out with the Glasgow area, because in Glasgow it was being led by Raymond Young. The way that housing association developed, it came from two traditions. There was the tradition in the tenement housing, and there was the tradition which was around meeting special needs. Funding was packaged in either you got funding for tenements or you got funding for special needs, and that meant that the funding drove the end use.
It used to be a bit of an add-on, put a ramp here and a handbar there, if you like. Now we're looking at a whole host of facilities that people can use in relation to disabled housing that make it easy to live in their home and easy to get around, and that's something we should be proud of.
We were always trying to take bits of money from different things to try to package it together so you could produce something which was more mixed housing. And eventually it became the conventional wisdom. The Scottish Federation of Housing Association was able to bring those two traditions together.
What about the rural dimension? Was that a significant part of your work?
It definitely was. Actually, I think that Scotland has understood the challenges of rural living and rural housing better than anywhere else in the United Kingdom.
In 1990, when this new body, Scottish Homes, which was introduced under Maggie Thatcher's regime, and one of the things that it came up with was a really good and innovative idea, and it was something called a Rural Home Ownership Grant, a ROG as it was known. And basically what that ROG did was to give people the opportunity to buy or build a house for themselves. It gave them a grant which filled the gap between what they could afford to raise by way of a mortgage and the actual cost of building a modest home like one of these. Here you've got affordable housing which has been built out of locally sourced timber, and people, as you can see, are burning logs to keep their homes warm. All makes perfect sense if you live in a rural area. So, you know, it's not rocket science, but it does need some policy changes to make some of these things happen.
What can we do to utilise renewable energy and to introduce renewable energy into our strategy?
It's something that Fairfield certainly we've grabbed quite quickly. We're focusing on insulation and heating. Insulation and heating systems are the big thing that save money for tenants and make things more user-friendly.
We had a scheme for students in Bridge of Allen, and it was night storage electric heaters, very expensive. So we turned that into a biomass project. So there is now a biomass heater generating heat for the whole scheme of 35 houses.
What about the right to buy? Did that feature significantly in your time?
It certainly did. It's strange, isn't it, now working in England and feeling like I'm revisiting old arguments. And the arguments then are the same now. Housing associations exist for the benefit of the community. Right to buy is something that exists for the benefit of the individual.
The Tory government is faced with mainly Labour local authorities in Scotland. And one of the ways of dealing with Labour local authorities is to say we will stop building more council houses at the same time as trying to break into the council ownership through right to buy.
So they were trying to change not only the voting pattern but the way people thought about private ownership. And if they did that in a big enough way, they could change the voting pattern and get a lot more people voting Tory. I'm quite convinced that was the rationale behind it. It didn't work, of course, but what it did do was it allowed those people who were lucky enough to live in the best houses the sale of the century, because they bought their house at a pittance.
And we ourselves have sold more than 800 houses under the right to buy. There was a myth that you could pay for more new housing as a result of the receipts, but the discounts were so large that in effect you couldn't actually do that.
A proposal that the right to buy should be extended to housing associations, we managed to get kicked into the long grass by saying there would be a 10-year lead-in period. 10 years was enough time for people to see sense. And indeed, I think that you could argue that conversation in about 2001, probably, I think it was, began the long road that led to the Scottish Government deciding to suspend the right to buy altogether.
Well, not just suspend, but
Get rid of
actually
it.
abolish it.
Yeah,
And
get rid of it.
next summer we'll see the last
It will
of
be
it.
gone. Yeah.
Hooray! Yes.
The bedroom tax has been of significant concern to us. It's something we've campaigned against, and it's been primarily mitigated in Scotland, although it hasn't sort of gone away.
We can deal with it. We can show the tenants how to overcome this. And the universal credit is the one that we're afraid of, but it's not in our doorstep yet.
What we're asking for is either for universal credit to be stalled until such time that the devolution settlement comes forward and the powers are transferred, or an early transfer of administrative powers so that the Scottish Government could in fact enact those powers now.
It is absolutely critical that there's a strong, clear, compelling voice about housing and about housing associations, and you need a credible organisation to be able to deliver that.
I think the SFHA is very evident in the Scottish Parliament, and that we would be known to the majority of the MSPs. We have receptions regularly.
Yeah.
We meet ministers at least 3 times a year, sometimes cabinet secretaries as well. We're often in front of committees, whether it's Equal Opportunities and Social Committee or the Petitions Committee or the Infrastructure Committee.
The staff of the two bodies do meet quite regular, so there's an ongoing dialogue, and it's a necessary dialogue for the sector.
SFHA gives a great deal of support to housing associations in some ways in how to tackle the very things that we're talking about, how to work collectively and work in partnership with the Scottish Government to look at ways of attracting finance into the housing sector, ways of how to assist housing associations that are the effects of welfare reform, about how they can be a strong voice acting for the housing sector. And I think that's very important that the housing associations have that strong voice speaking for them.
What would you think of as the best times in your days at the Federation? Either for the Federation or the sector?
Well, for the sector, it was a period of growth. We were going through the early parts of stock transfer on some of the peripheral estates, transfer of the Scottish Special Housing Association stock around to housing associations, and then the Glasgow transfer and Dumfries and Galloway, the Scottish borders. Some of the propositions about stock transfer in Scotland to community-owned organisations with a greater direct connection to the tenants would have dealt with historic debt, would have allowed more money for investment in the existing homes, would have created more opportunity to build new homes. And I think it's disappointing and frustrating, if understandable, that some of those opportunities were turned down. But in the main, I think we've been pretty good at arguing the case for housing and the importance of housing associations in delivering it. I think that's a reasonable record.
It's not just a question of bricks and mortar, it's a question of community confidence, it's a question of people enjoying lives which are independent and rewarding, and it's a question of people having better life chances as a result. We have to find ways of being able to continue to increase the supply of affordable housing.
I would like housing to speak with one voice. I've spent 40 years in housing, and the housing sector doesn't do itself any favours because it's fragmented and it doesn't come together to give one unified message. It's getting better at it, but it's taken us so many years to get there.
I know that the FFHA team will rally forth on anything that has to be done.
We need to respond to and respect the signal that was given to us by the Scottish Government that they are prepared to support RSLs and housing associations into the future.
I would hope that the movement, the housing association movement, and the SFHA in supporting it remains responsive enough to support organisations and initiatives that come through that try to break the mould. I think we need to break the mould every now and again.
These achievements have been hard-won and well worth the effort. Let's all rise to the challenges facing us in future and tackle the changes ahead for the sake of future generations.